Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. We recently did a video discussing whether the Jedi could have or would have cloned themselves during the Clone Wars to increase their numbers and potentially even save themselves during the Jedi Purge. It was a really interesting thought exercise and I had a lot of fun doing it, but while I was doing all that research on Force-sensitive clones, something clicked. I thought to myself, well, couldn't Rey be a clone? Now, we've done tons of videos in the past about Rey and who her parents were. We even came up with the theory that her parents were scavengers. It's possible that Luke has met the scavenger who found his lightsaber, who also happens to be Rey's mother or father. Before The Last Jedi, when Kylo said this,
"They're filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money."
But what if Kylo was lying? I mean, why in the hell would he know who Rey's parents were, right? Now guys, before I start, I do want to say I'm not 100% sold on my own theory that Rey is a clone, but I have a pretty strong argument, so I'm going to put everything out there and you guys can tell me what you think. Now, one of the things that really piqued my interest actually was a scene from the Legends video game The Force Unleashed 2. Which, by the way, for a Star Wars game that came out almost 10 years ago, had really good cinematic cutscenes. Anyway, our protagonist, Starkiller, otherwise known as Subject 1138, was a clone of the original Starkiller agent, otherwise known as Galen Marek. Galen Marek was barely a Jedi youngling when his parents were killed during Order 66 by Darth Vader himself on the planet of Kashyyyk. Vader ends up raising Marek as his personal apprentice, hoping to use him to one day usurp Palpatine's rule. And Vader's plan is a crazy one. After faking Galen Marek's death, he wants him to round up the Empire's biggest enemies and start a rebellion. So yeah, in Legends, Darth Vader is actually the one who starts the Rebel Alliance. His plan is to use them to distract Palpatine, so while Palpatine is busy focusing on the rebels, Darth Vader can take him out. Along the way, Marek ends up getting romantically attached to the Imperial pilot Juno Eclipse, who eventually defects to the rebellion. In the end, once Galen Marek rounded up all the rebellion leaders, he finds out that Darth Vader had been playing him the entire time. Emperor Palpatine was the one who wanted Vader to have Marek round up all the rebel leaders, not to distract Palpatine, but so that Palpatine could destroy all of his enemies.
Take them alive. The Emperor wants to execute them personally.
Marek sacrifices his own life to allow the Rebel Alliance to escape and live on. Galen Marek was an incredibly strong Force user, and Darth Vader didn't want to completely give up on him, so he saved his body and tried to clone him. After many failed attempts, I'm guessing around 1,000, hence the use of the iconic number 1138, again for Subject 1138. So Starkiller is one of the first clones that doesn't go crazy and start killing everyone. He knows that he's a clone from pretty early on, but there's a clear struggle within him to differentiate his memories with the ones of Galen Marek. It had been crucial for those memories to be passed on to the new clone so that Starkiller didn't have to relearn how to use the Force. One of the strongest memories that Starkiller has from Galen Marek was of Juno Eclipse, and in a training session where he's being tested by Darth Vader, he's unable to kill a droid disguised as her, failing in the eyes of Darth Vader. The Dark Lord attempts to destroy Starkiller, but the clone escapes. And like any clone in his early 20s whose life has been completely derailed, Marek is generally confused and puts himself on a mission to find himself. Driven by images of Juno Eclipse, Starkiller attempts to reconnect Galen Marek's past. Eventually, while searching for answers, he winds up on the planet of Dagobah 4 years before Luke Skywalker does. While there, he runs into a familiar little green man watching the entrance of a Force cave and has a short conversation with him.
You guard this place?
No, only a watcher am I now.
Then you'll let me pass.
Brought you here, the galaxy has. Your path, clearly, this is.
You know what I'm looking for.
Something lost. A part of yourself, perhaps.
A part of yourself, perhaps. That's exactly what happens. Marek is immediately assaulted by numerous clones of himself caught up in the roots of the tree, asking for his help. The Force Cave is clearly attached to his subconscious, and although eventually the cave shows him a Force vision of the future and of Juno Eclipse, his internal struggle about being a clone manifests as obstacles to what he really wants. He clearly has an identity crisis and is struggling to break free from being a clone so that he can now finally go on to live his own life. Now let's flash forward to when Luke goes into the tree. He also asks Yoda what he'll find inside.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you.
only what you take with you. In Luke's case, he takes fear that he will become what his father became. Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus also have their own encounters with a similar Force Nexus inside of the ancient Lothal Jedi Temple. They both undergo trials where they face their own fears and whatever is bothering their subconscious mind. So the point is, a Force Nexus will give the user visions about what they truly need or what they want.
That which you seek, inside, you will find.
Whether it's to overcome their own fear or find out who exactly they are. So now let's move on to the Force Nexus on the planet Ahch-To. Rey falls through an extremely evil and anal-looking hole and falls immediately into some water. We get a brief glimpse of her floating underneath the surface, not all that different from Luke in the Bacta tank, or perhaps a clone in their cloning pod. I mean, who's to say that her Force vision starts once she gets out of the water? What if it starts the moment she got dragged through that anal crevice? I mean, it's not exactly like she fell into the hole. Something obviously pulled her in, so I think it could be a part of the vision. Now obviously the motif of water and being submerged is important to Rey. When she first senses the dark anal passage while she's meditating, she's awoken by a salty spray of water flying out of it. Why is there this repeated theme of water, submersion, and enemas? Well, imagine for a clone when they first are revived and exit the fluid of their cloning sac, it's a traumatic experience. One that they might not remember, but something that subconsciously should be there in the back of their mind. After all, clones are usually uneasy because they lack identity, a feeling of self and purpose, especially when a clone is imprinted with memories that aren't their own. As a matter of fact, if you look at the clone troopers who also lacked an identity, they basically grabbed onto whatever defining characteristic they could find, whether that meant being a good soldier or, in Legends, a Mandalorian. Rey actually has similar personality characteristics. She's constantly trying to find a place where she belongs. So in our example, for one reason or another, Rey's memory of being a clone is being suppressed by someone else, or maybe even by her own psyche. It's completely possible for a brain to hide certain memories that are extremely harmful to a person's mental health. Whatever the case, Rey's subconscious, the embodiment of her true self, it's constantly pushing her conscious self to find her parents and who she actually is. When Rey gets out of the water or her clone tank, what does she see immediately? Copies of herself, just like Starkiller sees in his vision. And when she touches her first reflection, what happens? We get transported into the view of one of the clones in the reflection, looking at perhaps the original version of herself. Why do I say that? Well, look at all the reflections. They're all facing one direction, except for the original Rey, who is outside of the reflection. Rey then asks to see her parents.
Let me see them.
She walks up to an opaque surface where we see two shadows turn into one, and it's revealed who her parents are. Because Rey sees herself. Of course, she's disappointed by this and believes that she's just seeing a reflection. But from what we remember about the Force Nexus is what you take inside the Force Nexus is what you see. There are no fake things in there. Everything is the truth, including Rey seeing her own reflection as her own parents. Luke needed to see his own fear of turning to the dark side to overcome it. Kanan Jarrus needed to see his own capabilities to finally become a Jedi Knight. So the Force Nexus directly channels your subconscious, the pure, complete truth of yourself that is not altered by the brain's tendency to forget things that are a little bit too painful for an individual. So we know that what Rey sees in this vision has to be true. It's either a metaphorical or literal version of what is driving her subconscious mind. What's interesting is that Rey is the first individual in Star Wars lore who comes out of a Force Nexus vision without truly understanding what her vision was or gaining anything from it. She clearly is confused and upset by what she saw. But again, the Force Nexus always shows an individual what they want, just like how Starkiller at the end of his Force vision wanted to know the whereabouts of Juno Eclipse. Just like how Ahsoka Tano wanted to know what happened to her former master Anakin Skywalker, and just like how Ezra was given a Kyber crystal by Yoda. So if Rey really wanted to see her parents. If she had biological parents, she would have seen them. But again, she only sees herself. You know, when I started this video, I wasn't completely sold on it, but now as I'm talking more, I'm starting to believe in it a little more. Because if we look at Rey, she does have some very suspicious things about her. We don't really know much about her past, but for the most part, since she was a little girl, she's lived as a scavenger on Jakku. And knowing that rather mundane background, a lot of people have problems with just how competent Rey is at almost everything. She's an excellent fighter, yet she's had little training other than occasionally having to fight some fellow scavengers and bandits. She's even a better pilot, pulling off some incredible moves with the Falcon. Now, she's had some training with a very primitive simulation system, but I'd argue that's hardly a good substitute for actual piloting. Besides, some of the moves she pulls off aren't something a sim would even teach. These are some very advanced evasive maneuvers. Rey is the perfect specimen, and her force powers even surprised the extremely powerful Luke Skywalker. Rey, without any combat experience with the lightsaber, is even able to defeat Kylo Ren. Sure, he's wounded, but it's obvious that Rey overpowers him using her extremely strong connection to the Force. That's the face of an individual who's just realized that she is a badass Jedi warrior who is used to kicking around emotionally confused little emo boys. I mean, this runs counter to almost everything we see Luke go through. Luke is considered one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. He was raised in a similar isolated lifestyle as Rey, yet what happens when he gets jumped by a Tusken Raider? He's immediately defeated. He's not some great crack shot either. He had to train and learn and develop these skills over time because he was a real person, not a clone. And the reason why he's a great pilot is because he's had plenty of real-life experience flying a T-16 Skyhopper. So if Rey does seem to be overpowered without necessarily having any training, maybe it's done with a purpose that serves the entire plot. We know that clones can be heavily genetically altered to be perfect specimens. They can even retain certain memories or learn certain things through a process called flash learning. Now the real question is, who is Rey cloned from, why did they do it, and also who cloned Rey in the first place? The world of Jakku actually has some significance. It was where the Empire fought its last battle, and it's also home to one of Emperor Palpatine's observatories. These were highly secretive laboratories that Palpatine had built on several worlds across the galaxy. They all had different purposes. Some had ancient Sith artifacts in them, others had live specimens, some had advanced technology, but most of them had advanced laboratories. I'm almost certain that Emperor Palpatine would have preserved some of the cloning technology from the Kaminoans, and we all know how much Emperor Palpatine liked having different apprentices. Especially because he wasn't all that happy with Mr. Anakin. I fell into lava and got third-degree burns on my entire body because I don't understand how to use topographic information to fight my battles, Skywalker. What if Palpatine had recovered Luke's arm after his battle on Bespin with Darth Vader? If we look back at The Force Awakens, now things start to click together. It makes sense for Luke's old lightsaber to call out to a person who was made out of the genetic material that was his hand. We did an entire video talking about how the lightsaber was key to who Rey's parents were. But in that video, we theorized that the visions that Rey had were actually the lightsaber's own experiences, as the lightsaber is potentially in every scene that she sees in the vision. But what if we were wrong? Because the other thing that connects every vision that Rey has during this Force Nexus vision is that either she or Luke were present in those moments. What if it's the recollection of her own memories and the memories that were given to her after she was cloned from Luke's arm? That actually does make sense. The one hole in my previous theory about the lightsaber's visions was that one scene where Rey is left on Jakku and her parents were leaving there. I originally suggested that Rey's parents were actually scavengers and they were holding the lightsaber and they were on the ship that was flying away, but that's kind of a stretch. Also, in the scene where Luke is watching the temple burn down, I hypothesized that the camera angles and Luke's motion point towards the lightsaber being hidden in R2-D2's dome, because that's where Anakin kept it sometimes. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's much more obvious. It's just Luke's vision. And because we know that a Force Nexus will only show what an individual brings into that vision must have come from Luke, or the clone of Luke. Right. Well guys, that is my new theory about who Rey's parents are. Should be interesting to see if J.J. Abrams will be revealing this in his next movie. We're not really sure now that Rian Johnson has derailed the entire series, but maybe this Force vision does have some deeper meaning that connects it to the entire trilogy. I'm hoping it does. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.